It started like any other flight, but became the day Keanu Reeves saved lives in the sky. The sun had just begun its descent over the Pacific as Flight 286 soared at cruising altitude, 38,000 feet above the clouds. A hum of idle chatter floated through the cabin, tray tables clicked open, and the occasional laugh punctuated the white noise of the engines. In first class, nestled quietly in a window seat wearing a plain black t-shirt and jeans, sat Keanu Reeves. Known for his humility, he'd boarded like anyone else, refusing the special treatment the airline offered. No entourage, no flash, just a man, a book, and a backpack tucked neatly beneath his seat. The flight was supposed to be smooth. The weather had cleared over the Rockies, and Los Angeles was just under 3 hours away. Most passengers settled in with their movies or closed their eyes for a nap. But amid the calm, no one, not even the seasoned pilots in the cockpit, could have predicted what was coming next. It began with a jolt. Small, almost imperceptible. A bump in the air, the kind that made passengers glance up but quickly return to their screens. Then came the second, harder. The third made drinks jump from cups. And then the cabin dipped. A deep, sickening drop that made hearts race and screams echo down the aisles. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead like lifelines falling from the heavens. Panic erupted as turbulence rocked the aircraft with ferocity. A stewardess tried shouting instructions, but her voice cracked, overcome by fear and the chaos of 200 terrified souls. In the storm of screams, someone stood up, not in panic, but in purpose. Keanu. With steady hands, he pulled down the nearest oxygen mask, securing it for a young boy frozen in terror. His voice was calm, so calm it cut through the panic like a lighthouse through fog. "It's okay. Breathe slow. I've got you." He turned to the next person, helping an elderly man secure his mask, all while the plane continued to shake violently. Somewhere in the chaos, someone whispered, "Is that Keanu Reeves?" But fame didn't matter now. What mattered was that he wasn't panicking. He wasn't screaming. He was helping. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and like the video so you don't miss tomorrow's video. The shrill chime of the emergency alarm pulsed through the aircraft like a warning bell in a war zone. The cabin lights flickered, overhead compartments burst open from the violent shaking, and bags tumbled into the aisles. A child's cry pierced through the roar of the engines. In the middle of it all, Keanu moved with the focus of a seasoned responder, not a man best known for red carpets and movie premieres. The stewardess, barely 22, in her first month on the job, was frozen by the cockpit door, clutching the intercom handset with white knuckles. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Keanu stepped toward her, dodging a fallen luggage bag with practiced ease. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're okay," he said, voice low and steady. "We need to help them breathe. That's what matters right now." She looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes, and nodded like a frightened child. He gave her the smallest of smiles, reassurance in the midst of a nightmare. "Make your way row by row. I'll go the other side. We'll check masks together." That was all it took. Together, they moved through the plane, he on the right, she on the left. Keanu bent down to help a mother secure her daughter's oxygen line. He showed a teenage boy how to tighten the strap properly. When a businessman's hands shook too violently to get his own mask on, Keanu guided his fingers and said, "Slow breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth." He knelt in the aisle next to an elderly woman gripping her rosary beads. "You're safe. I'm here." His words didn't come from a script. They came from someplace real. Somewhere in the back of the plane, someone whispered again, "Is that really Keanu Reeves?" But no one had time to be starstruck. They just knew he was saving them. The shaking finally subsided, but the intercom stayed silent. The captain hadn't spoken since the turbulence started. Keanu glanced toward the cockpit. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. But for now, the masks were on. People were breathing. Calm was settling. And in the worst moment of their lives, someone had given them the courage to survive it. The oxygen masks hung like ghostly vines from the ceiling, gently swaying as the plane rocked with occasional tremors. The noise had died down, but not the fear. Passengers clutched the arms of their seats, each of them waiting for a voice. Any voice. Something official. Something from the cockpit. But nothing came. Keanu stood near the front of the cabin, his eyes locked on the sealed cockpit door. The young stewardess. Her name was Talia, he had learned, stood beside him, breath still shallow but steady now. "They're not responding," she whispered, glancing at the small speaker above her. "I've called 3 times. Nothing." Keanu's brow furrowed. "What's the protocol if the pilots aren't answering?" Talia hesitated. "There isn't one. Not for this." A murmur rippled through the front rows. Word was spreading, people could feel it in the silence. The pilot and co-pilot were unreachable. Keanu looked back down the aisle. Faces stared at him, not because he was famous, but because he was the only one standing. The only one moving. The only one doing something. With quiet resolve, Keanu turned to Talia. "I need to get into that cockpit." Her eyes widened. "You can't. It's locked from the inside. Only the crew has." "I know," Keanu said. "But something's wrong, and I don't think we can wait much longer." He took a step toward the door, examining the emergency panel beside it. It was a reinforced security system standard on most commercial jets. But Keanu had studied enough for his movie roles to recognize one crucial thing. There was a manual override for emergencies. A code. A procedure. He looked at Talia again. "You trust me?" She hesitated for a beat, then nodded. Keanu pressed the intercom. His voice rang out calmly through the cabin. "This is Keanu Reeves. I know that sounds strange, but right now, that's not what matters. What matters is that the pilots aren't responding, and we need to make sure someone's in control of this plane." A collective inhale swept through the passengers. "I'm going to check on them. Stay in your seats. Help each other. We'll get through this." Then he looked to Talia. "Let's open the door." Talia's fingers trembled as she typed in the override sequence. It was a rarely used emergency code, one meant only for unthinkable scenarios. And this was becoming exactly that. Click. The sound was small, but it might as well have been thunder. Keanu reached for the handle, heart thudding with controlled urgency. His hand paused, resting against the cool metal. In that second, a strange stillness settled over him. He didn't know what waited on the other side, only that the lives of everyone on board could depend on what he did next. He opened the cockpit door. The lights inside flickered faintly, casting the narrow space in a pale glow. The control panel blinked with red and amber warnings. But it wasn't the flashing instruments that stopped Keanu in his tracks. It was the stillness of the 2 pilots. Both the captain and co-pilot were slumped in their seats, unconscious, their heads tilted awkwardly to the side. Oxygen masks dangled uselessly by their faces. "Captain?" Keanu rushed forward. "Sir? Can you hear me?" No response. Talia gasped behind him. "Oh my God." Keanu quickly checked the pilot's pulse. Faint, but there. The co-pilot too. They were both alive, but something had taken them out of commission. "Poison?" Talia murmured. Keanu shook his head. "No. Cabin pressure. A leak." His eyes darted to a flashing light on the control panel. Cabin pressure had dropped suddenly, triggering the oxygen deployment. But for the pilots in a sealed cockpit, the oxygen hadn't kicked in fast enough. They passed out. "Probably from hypoxia," Keanu said. "And we're flying on autopilot right now." Talia's voice cracked. Can you fly a plane?" Keanu looked at the co-pilot's console, hands gripping the seat. His mind raced. Decades of film sets, months of working with aviation consultants, hours in simulators for a movie he once shot. "I can try," he said. Talia stared at him. "You're not serious." He glanced over his shoulder. "I'm very serious." He sat in the co-pilot's chair, scanning the controls. Altitude, airspeed, coordinates. Everything was holding for now. Keanu Reeves had just become the acting pilot of a commercial airplane. The pilot's chair creaked under Keanu as he leaned forward, scanning the instrument panel like it was a bomb defusal kit. Red lights blinked. A soft warning tone repeated in the background, a metronome of urgency. Behind him, Talia stood frozen, wide-eyed, her headset still crackling with static. Keanu's hands hovered over the controls. He took a breath. Not the panicked kind. Not the dramatic inhale of someone out of their depth. It was calm, grounded. "I did 6 months of simulator work for Skyfire," he muttered, half to himself. Talia blinked. "The action movie?" He nodded, eyes focused ahead. "Yeah, turns out I paid attention." The autopilot was holding steady, but it wouldn't last forever. Fuel was burning. LA was still hours away. And the real question remained, could he land the thing? First things first, he had to talk to someone who actually knew what they were doing. "Talia, can you get me air traffic control?" She scrambled into the jump seat, fumbling with the headset. Static poured through the line until a voice crackled in. "Flight 286, this is Los Angeles Center." We've been trying to reach you. Please respond. Do you copy? Keanu leaned toward the mic, pressing the button with steady fingers. This is temporary co-pilot Keanu Reeves. The captain and co-pilot are both unconscious. I'm not a certified pilot, but I've got basic training and I'm in the seat. Silence. Then, sir, can you repeat that? I'm Keanu Reeves. Yes, that Keanu Reeves. But right now, I'm the best chance you've got of keeping this plane in the air. Another pause. Understood, Mr. Reeves. We'll walk you through it. Talia exhaled a laugh through her tears. Did you really just say that Keanu Reeves? I mean, it felt relevant. The controller's voice came back. Calm. Professional. Okay, Mr. Reeves, listen carefully. First, let's check your heading. Do you see the NAV display to your left? Keanu found it instantly. Yeah, I'm holding steady at 270. Altitude 38,000. Good. Now we're going to guide you into a slow descent. You ready? Keanu's eyes never left the sky ahead. His voice was steady. I was born ready. Let's bring these people home. Keanu adjusted the throttle as instructed, guiding the aircraft into a gentle descent. The autopilot clicked off with a mechanical clunk, and now it was all him. His knuckles tightened slightly on the yoke. Behind the cockpit door, the passengers sat in stunned silence, the fear still thick, but edged now with a thread of hope. He was no longer just the man in the movies. He was their captain now. Then it happened. Beep, beep, beep. A red warning light flared to life on the center panel. The words flashed across the display. Right engine, fire detected. Talia gasped. Oh my God. Keanu's heart skipped, just for a second, but he kept his voice calm. We've got a fire in engine 2. The controller's voice came fast through the headset. Flight 286, confirm right engine fire? Confirmed, Keanu replied. Requesting immediate emergency procedure. Understood. Cut throttle to engine 2. Engage fire suppression system. Keanu moved swiftly, flipping switches he had rehearsed 1,000 times in simulated drills, but now it was real. Flames. Fuel. Metal. Fire suppression engaged. Copy that. Maintain descent. Diverting you to San Jose International. It's closer. The plane lurched slightly as the power from the right side dropped. Passengers gripped their armrests. From the cabin, a faint smell, burnt metal and smoke, crept in through the air vents. Talia relayed what was happening over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we've experienced a technical issue, but everything is under control. Please remain calm, stay seated, and keep your masks on. She clicked off and looked at Keanu. Under control? He gave her a crooked smile. It is now. But in truth, he knew what was coming. One engine down. Unconscious pilots. A plane full of terrified people. And a landing sequence he'd only pretended to do for a movie scene. And now, he'd have to do it for real. Still, he stayed locked in. Every instruction from the controller burned into his mind. He glanced at the pilots slumped beside him, then to the sky ahead, then down to the fire indicator, which finally dimmed to yellow. Fire's out, he said. We're not. The descent grew steeper as Keanu followed the air traffic controller's every word. His jaw was tight, focus razor sharp. One engine out meant less thrust, less control, and a shorter margin for error. Below them, the first lights of San Jose flickered in the early dusk like tiny stars. Hope on the horizon. Talia leaned toward the mic. We are beginning our emergency descent. Please brace for landing. Follow crew instructions and remain calm. The cabin was tense, but calm. That calm. It was Keanu's doing. In the cockpit, the voice in Keanu's ear spoke again. All right, Flight 286. You'll approach from the south. Wind 5 knots. We've cleared runway 30 left. Emergency crews are standing by. Keanu gripped the yoke, nodding even though no one could see him. Copy that. Gear down. Go for it. Keanu flipped the landing gear switch. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. The gear warning light blinked amber. Talia gasped. What's wrong? Keanu kept his voice calm. The gear didn't deploy. The controller came back fast. Flight 286. Confirm landing gear failure? Confirmed. Attempting manual extension. Keanu reached for the emergency override handle beneath the console. It took both hands and all his strength. The mechanism was stiff, ancient, and rarely used. He pulled. There was a groan, a thud, and then the sound every pilot lives for. Clunk, clunk, clunk. The gear dropped. Locked. Talia let out a breath like she'd been holding it for a lifetime. It worked. Keanu glanced at the indicator. We've got wheels. But they weren't out of the woods yet. Altitude 1,000. The controller called. You're cleared to land. Wind's stable. You're doing great, Mr. Reeves. Keanu eased back on the throttle, guiding the plane into line with the runway. The tarmac stretched ahead like a lifeline. The passengers braced. Talia gripped her seat. Keanu narrowed his eyes. Come on, just like the simulator. The ground rushed toward them. And then, boom. The rear tires hit hard. The plane bounced. Sparks sprayed. The right side, where the engine had failed, dragged, screeching against the pavement. Smoke curled past the windows. Lights flickered. But Keanu held the yoke steady. The brakes screamed. The nose dipped. Thud. They were on the ground. Screeching. Slowing. Stopping. A beat of silence. Then the cabin erupted into cheers and sobs. They had landed. But then Talia's eyes widened. Keanu, the right engine. It's smoking again. He turned toward the window. The cheers had barely faded when the smell of smoke grew thick and sharp. Outside, flames licked up the side of the fuselage, bright against the twilight. The damaged right engine had reignited, spilling fire onto the wing. Inside the cockpit, Talia covered her mouth. We have to evacuate. Now. Keanu was already on his feet. Go. Get the doors open. I'll get the passengers moving. The intercom crackled to life one last time with Keanu's voice, calm but commanding. This is Keanu Reeves. We've landed, but there's a fire on the right side. Stay calm, listen to the crew, and move quickly. We're getting you out. Then he ran. Down the narrow aisle, Keanu's presence was immediate, like a wave of purpose crashing through the cabin. People unbuckled. Some were frozen in panic. Others sobbed. Eyes on me, Keanu shouted. Left side exits only. Stay low. Help each other. We're walking out of this together. The flight attendants scrambled to open the doors. Slides deployed with a hiss. Talia guided passengers to the front. Keanu stayed mid-cabin, grabbing carry-ons tossed in the aisle, clearing paths, lifting children into parents' arms. His face was streaked with sweat, his shirt soaked, but his voice never wavered. He made it to the back, where smoke was pouring in. A woman sobbed, covering her face. I can't see, I can't. Keanu dropped to one knee beside her. You don't need to see. You just need to move with me. He pulled his jacket off, wrapped it around her face, and guided her low under the smoke. He found a boy stuck between rows, clutching a stuffed bear, frozen in fear. Hey, Keanu said softly, I got you. He scooped the boy into his arms and turned back toward the aisle, just as a fireball flashed outside the broken window. The heat surged. The smoke choked. But Keanu kept going. By the time he made it back to the front, the last few passengers were sliding to safety. Talia waved from the doorway. You're the last one. He looked back once, just to be sure. No one left. Then he slid down, cradling the boy tight, landing in a crouch as the fire engines rolled in. Cheers erupted again. Talia threw her arms around him. You saved them. The boy hugged him without saying a word. Keanu looked back at the burning plane and let himself feel it for the first time. The weight, the fear, the relief. But the job wasn't done, because someone was walking toward him. The pilot. The airport tarmac buzzed with emergency crews, flashing lights, and distant sirens. Medics rushed to check on passengers, parents cried with relief, and news cameras were already converging beyond the fences. But in the center of it all, standing beneath the smoldering wing of Flight 286, was Keanu Reeves. Still catching his breath. Still holding the boy's hand. The boy looked up at him, eyes wide. You're Neo. Keanu smiled, kneeling to eye level. Today, I was just Keanu. Then, from the smoke and chaos, a stretcher rolled forward. The captain, pale, weak, but conscious, was sitting up, an oxygen mask hanging from his neck. His uniform was torn, his eyes bloodshot, but when he saw Keanu, he motioned for the medics to stop. He climbed off the stretcher with help from the paramedics, walking slowly, shakily, step by step, until he stood face to face with the man who'd landed his plane and saved his crew. Keanu opened his mouth, but the captain beat him to it. You didn't just save a plane, he said, voice hoarse. You saved every soul on board. And you did it with no training, no title, just heart. Keanu looked down, the praise clearly uncomfortable. I had help. Talia, the crew, the passengers were brave. The captain nodded. They followed you. You stayed calm when even I wouldn't have. That cockpit was seconds from becoming a tomb. The The captain reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, his pilot wings pin, silver and gold, dulled from years of flight. He held it out. Keanu shook his head. "I'm not." But the captain gently pressed it into his palm. "You earned them." A hush fell over those watching. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters whispered. But Keanu just stared at the pin. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a souvenir. It was a symbol of trust, of life, of doing the right thing when no one else could. Talia stepped forward, teary-eyed, holding out a cup of water. "You didn't just land that plane, Keanu," she whispered. "You landed all of us." He gave her a tired smile. "I guess I'm driving next time too, huh?" She laughed through her tears. "Only if there's turbulence." They all looked back at the plane. The fire was out. The wreckage was cooling. But every single person on that flight had walked away. And that was something no one would ever forget. The next morning, the world woke up to the story. It was everywhere. Keanu Reeves saves Flight 286. Actor becomes real-life hero at 38,000 feet. From Matrix to Miracle. The headlines buzzed, news anchors scrambled for clips, passengers gave emotional interviews, and social media exploded. Videos of the landing spread like wildfire, stitched with cell phone footage of Keanu helping passengers, comforting children, and emerging from the burning wreckage like a figure from myth. But while the world celebrated him, Keanu was already gone. No press conference. No red carpet. No interview. Just a quiet hospital visit to check on the injured captain, a handwritten thank you note left with the airline staff, and a backpack slung over his shoulder as he walked alone through a quiet corner of San Jose's private terminal. Talia caught up with him just before he slipped away. "You're just leaving?" Keanu nodded. "They're all okay. That's what matters." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. "You're not just an actor, you know." He smiled. "Never wanted to be." She stepped forward and hugged him, tight, heartfelt, real. "When people talk about heroes, they'll talk about that night. About you." He shrugged slightly. "If they do. I hope they remember the crew. The people who stayed calm. The kid who held his little sister's hand the whole time. That's the real story." As he turned to leave, Talia called out one last time. "So what now? What do you do after saving a plane?" Keanu turned, walking backward, his silhouette framed by morning light spilling through the glass doors. "I go get coffee. Maybe read a book." Then, with a wave and a soft smile, he disappeared into the rising sun. No cape. No catchphrase. Just Keanu doing what he always does. Showing up when the world needs him most. And walking away like nothing happened. But for 200 people, something did happen. Something they'd never forget. And somewhere, tucked into a drawer, wrapped in cloth and humility, sat a pair of pilot's wings given not for rank or flight hours, but for courage.